You feel alone, vulnerable, and overwhelmed. But then, a stranger appears. He offers help, a lifeline in your moment of need. You accept, grateful for the assistance. But as you follow him, doubts creep in. Who is this man? What does he want? Is he truly helping you, or is there something more to his intentions? This is the story of a woman who found herself in just such a situation. Alone, disconnected, and desperate, she was approached by a man who seemed to offer the help she so desperately needed. But as the minutes ticked by, she began to question everything she thought she knew. Was he truly a savior, or was there something darker at play? In this video, we're going to delve into this gripping tale. We'll explore the events that led to that fateful encounter at the airport, the twists and turns that followed, and the shocking revelations that emerged. Along the way, we'll examine the complexities of human nature, the fine line between trust and suspicion, and the lengths to which people will go to help or deceive. But this isn't just a story about one woman and one man. It's a reflection of the world we live in today. A world where connections are fleeting, trust is fragile, and appearances can be deceiving. It's a reminder that not everything is as it seems, and sometimes, the truth is stranger than fiction. So, stay with us as we unravel this mystery. You're about to discover the answer to a question that has been on your mind since the beginning. Who was this man, really? And what was his true motive? But be warned, the truth may not be what you expect. As we peel back the layers of this story, prepare for surprises, twists, and revelations that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust us, you won't want to miss a single moment of this journey. As the woman stood at the airport terminal, her phone dead and her flight boarding in mere minutes, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had settled in her stomach. She had just arrived from a long-haul flight, her mind still foggy from the journey. The bustling crowd around her seemed oblivious to her plight, each person absorbed in their own world. She had tried to reach out to her friend, but her phone had died unexpectedly, leaving her stranded without a way to communicate or navigate the airport. That's when he approached, a man in his mid-30s, dressed casually, with a friendly smile that seemed genuine. He offered assistance, suggesting she could follow him to a nearby charging station. Desperate and relieved, she agreed, unaware that this seemingly innocent encounter would soon spiral into a web of confusion and fear. As they walked through the terminal, the man made small talk, asking about her travels and offering insights into the airport's layout. His demeanor was calm, and his voice had a soothing quality that put her at ease. But as they passed through a less crowded area, she began to notice subtle inconsistencies. His directions seemed off, and the path he led her down felt increasingly unfamiliar. She tried to shake off the growing sense of unease, attributing it to her exhaustion and the stress of the situation. But then, he stopped in front of a secluded lounge area, one she had never seen before. He turned to her, his smile widening, and said, "Here we are. Just a few minutes to charge your phone, and you'll be good to go." Confused and slightly apprehensive, she stepped inside. The lounge was dimly lit, with plush chairs and a quiet ambience that contrasted sharply with the bustling terminal outside. He gestured for her to sit and plugged her phone into a charging port. As the device powered up, she glanced around, noticing the absence of other travelers. It was then that she realized she had no idea where she was or how she had gotten there. Panic began to set in as she questioned the man's intentions. Was this a legitimate service, or had she been lured into a trap? Just as she was about to voice her concerns, the man excused himself, stepping out to take a phone call. Left alone, she seized the opportunity to gather her bearings. She stood up, her legs shaky, and approached the door. But before she could reach it, the man returned, his expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone neutral. She nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, alarm bells were ringing. She needed to get out of there, but how? The lounge had no windows, and the only exit was blocked by the man. Her mind raced as she tried to formulate a plan. She considered calling for help, but her phone was still charging, and she had no idea how long it would take. She thought about running, but the man was standing between her and the door. Desperation clawed at her as she searched for an escape. Then, she remembered the emergency exit button near the back of the lounge. It was a long shot, but it was her only option. With a deep breath, she made her move. She darted toward the button, her heart pounding in her chest. The man lunged to stop her, but she was faster. She slammed her hand against the button, and the emergency alarm blared to life. The man froze, his eyes wide with shock. The door to the lounge swung open, and she bolted into the corridor, not looking back. She didn't stop running until she reached the main terminal, breathless and trembling. She found a security officer and recounted her ordeal. The officer listened intently, then nodded. "You're not the first to report something like this," he said grimly. "We've had similar incidents in the past. We'll take it from here." As she sat in the security office, waiting for her friend to arrive, she couldn't help but wonder, who was that man? What was his true purpose? And how many others had fallen victim to his scheme? The answers remained elusive, but one thing was certain: she would never look at a stranger offering help the same way again. She thought she was safe. The airport was bustling, the terminal alive with the hum of travelers, announcements, and the clatter of luggage wheels. But beneath the surface, something darker was unfolding. The man who had offered assistance, the one who had seemed so genuine, was not who he appeared to be. His friendly demeanor, his helpful gestures, they were all part of a carefully crafted facade. He had been watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when she had followed him into that secluded lounge area, she had unknowingly walked straight into his trap. The lounge, dimly lit and eerily quiet, had been the perfect setting. As she sat there, her phone charging, she had felt a fleeting sense of safety. But that sense of security was shattered when she discovered that the man had tampered with her device. He had installed malicious software, redirecting her calls and intercepting her messages. By the time she realized what had happened, it was too late. The Times of India. In the days that followed, the consequences of her encounter became painfully clear. Her phone's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Calls she hadn't made, messages she hadn't sent, and transactions she hadn't authorized began to appear. Her once trustworthy device had been turned against her, a silent accomplice in a scheme she had never seen coming. Desperate for answers, she turned to the authorities. But the more she dug, the more obstacles appeared. Surveillance footage from the lounge had been conveniently erased. Witnesses who might have seen something were either unreachable or unwilling to help. Even the airport staff, who had seemed so accommodating, now appeared distant and uncooperative. It was as if the entire system was conspiring to keep the truth hidden. Then, just when she thought she might be getting close to uncovering the full extent of the scam, a new twist emerged. A figure from her past, someone she had once trusted implicitly, reappeared in her life. They claimed to have information that could help, but their sudden involvement raised more questions than answers. Was this person genuinely trying to assist her, or were they another piece in the puzzle, a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand? As she navigated this labyrinth of deceit, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every move she made, every step she took, seemed to be anticipated. Her every conversation felt monitored, her every action scrutinized. It was as if the web she had unwittingly walked into was tightening around her, and the more she struggled, the more ensnared she became. The deeper she delved, the more she realized that this was no ordinary scam. It was part of a larger, more insidious network, one that operated in the shadows, pulling strings and manipulating events from behind the scenes. And at the center of it all was the man who had first approached her at the airport. He was not just a lone opportunist, he was a cog in a much larger machine, a machine that was now turning its gears against her. But even as the walls closed in, she refused to back down. Determined to expose the truth, she began to piece together the fragments of information she had gathered. Each revelation brought her closer to understanding the full scope of the conspiracy, but it also brought her closer to danger. The more she uncovered, the more perilous her situation became. And then, just as she was on the verge of a breakthrough, a final, chilling message appeared on her phone: "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." The sender was unknown, the threat unmistakable. It was clear that someone, or something, was watching her every move, and they were willing to go to any lengths to keep their secrets buried. Now, with the stakes higher than ever, she faces a choice: continue her quest for the truth, risking everything in the process, or walk away, leaving the mysteries unsolved and the dangers lurking in the shadows. The path she chooses will determine not only her fate but also the fate of others who may unknowingly be caught in the same web of deceit. The question remains, will she uncover the truth, or will the forces arrayed against her prove too powerful to overcome? Just when it felt like the pressure couldn't mount any higher, the mystery took a sharp, unexpected turn, one that hit painfully close to home. As she sat in her apartment, still reeling from the ominous message that had flashed across her phone, a familiar name appeared in her inbox: her younger brother, Tyler. They hadn't spoken in weeks, not since an argument over a family issue she barely remembered now. His email was brief, the kind that felt rushed and uncharacteristically vague. Got something weird on my end. Thought you should know. Someone sent me a clip from an airport security camera of you. It was anonymous. Are you okay? Her blood ran cold. Not only had someone been following her, they were now involving her family. Tyler didn't even live in the same state. There was no reason for him to receive anything unless this situation was broader, more calculated, and far more dangerous than she ever imagined. Suddenly, what felt like an isolated incident became something much larger, with tentacles stretching out into her personal life. She called him immediately, but the call went to voicemail. She tried again, nothing. Her hands shook as she replayed the message in her mind, wondering who had access to that footage, and why it would be sent to Tyler. Was it a warning, a twisted intimidation tactic, or a mistake? Either way, it meant that the people behind this weren't just watching her. They were reaching out, trying to unsettle her foundation, to destabilize her through the people she cared about. Worse still, she had no idea what Tyler might do. He wasn't exactly cautious. If he tried to investigate on his own, he could easily walk right into the same trap she had barely escaped from. As if that weren't enough, her return to the airport security office to follow up on her report turned up yet another unsettling detail. The officer she had spoken with, the one who had listened so intently and assured her this wasn't the first case like hers, was no longer on duty. In fact, according to the supervisor, there was no record of anyone by that name working at the airport. Confused, she asked to review the visitor log and report she had filed. But the system showed nothing. No report. No surveillance request. No interview. It was as if the entire incident had been wiped from the system, like it had never happened. And the officer, the only person who had shown any real concern, might have been part of the game all along. Now she didn't know who to trust. Every detail she thought she could rely on was unraveling. The man in the lounge was no longer the only enigma. The so-called security officer had vanished. Her brother was being targeted. But that wasn't all. That night, as she sat staring blankly at her laptop, trying to retrace the timeline, she received an encrypted email from an unknown sender. It had no subject line and contained only a short line of text: "We warned you." Attached was a file, a blurry image of her, standing outside the airport, talking to the mysterious man. The timestamp was altered, though, indicating a time she wasn't even at the airport. It looked doctored. But why would someone alter an image of her, and more importantly, who had the ability to manipulate security footage and plant fake timestamps? Then came the final twist, one that made her question everything she thought she knew. While scanning through her phone's recovered files, she stumbled upon a voice memo. It was corrupted and static-filled, but parts of the audio were clear enough to decipher. It wasn't her voice. It was the man's. And he was speaking to someone else. She suspects nothing. Once the brother gets involved, we'll have what we need. Her breath caught. The brother. Tyler. Was this entire thing set up to get to him? And if so, what did they want? What did he have? The voice memo ended abruptly, but not before she heard a sound that chilled her to the core, her own voice, faint and confused, in the background. Everything was wrong. The timeline. The evidence. The people she thought were on her side. What had started as a terrifying encounter at the airport was now revealing itself to be part of a much more calculated plan, and she wasn't even sure she was the primary target anymore. She had been a piece in someone else's game, moved deliberately across the board for reasons she couldn't yet see. And the more she tried to understand the full scope, the more questions emerged. Who were they? What did they want from her or from Tyler? Why fake surveillance footage, erase police records, and manipulate audio recordings unless the truth, if discovered, would unravel something far bigger than a simple airport scam? Now she was standing at the edge of something massive. She didn't sleep again. After the burner phone lit up with that final message, "Time's up," she kept the lights on, her shoes by the door, keys in hand, and her thoughts racing in loops she couldn't untangle. She called Tyler's number again, hoping this time it might ring longer, but the silence on the other end was more brutal than a voicemail could ever be. She scrolled through the burner phone, trying to trace anything, metadata, clues, a file hidden in the settings, but whoever programmed it had covered their tracks. Every click was a dead end. The only thing that remained was that gnawing, relentless sense that someone was waiting for her to react. That she was being manipulated not just in space, but in time. So when the knock came on her door at 3:42 a.m., not loud, not frantic, but soft, deliberate, she froze. She didn't move at first. Just waited, barely breathing, eyes fixed on the door. It came again. The same rhythm, the same calm pressure behind it. Against every instinct she had, she approached. "Who is it?" she asked, voice dry. No response. She checked the peephole, and her heart nearly stopped. It was Elise. Elise had been her roommate during college, someone who had drifted out of her life years ago after a falling out neither of them fully confronted. There had been betrayal, something about a stolen internship, a rumor that had spiraled, but none of that mattered now because Elise looked terrified. Not cautious. Terrified. She let her in without thinking. Elise walked in fast, eyes scanning the room like she expected someone else to be there. "I don't have time," she said. "I've been watching, and you're in deep. Deeper than you know. But you weren't supposed to be the one they followed. That wasn't the plan." It took a moment for her to understand what Elise was saying. "What do you mean watching? What plan?" But Elise didn't answer right away. She walked over to the table, picked up the burner phone, and turned it over in her hand like she recognized it. Then she sighed, a sound of guilt and resignation rolled into one. "I gave them your name," she said quietly. "Not because I wanted to. Because I had to. They said it was just background clearance, a risk assessment on people I knew from back then. You were just a name. I didn't think they'd come after you. But when Tyler contacted me last week, I realized something had gone wrong. He told me he got the same message you did." The room spun. "Tyler contacted you? When?" "4 days ago," Elise said, looking down. "He said he was being followed, too. He told me he traced something to an old case I worked on. The man at the airport, he wasn't random. He's connected to a real operation, and you were bait. They used you to get to someone else. I think it was him." It hit like a punch to the chest. Everything started to unravel. The man she'd met at the airport, the strange lounge, the corrupted files, the planted footage, none of it was about her. She was never the main target. She was the distraction. And Tyler, who had somehow gotten tangled in something bigger, had used her unknowingly to flush the network out. But that also meant Elise wasn't who she pretended to be either. Her past wasn't just a string of missed connections and old betrayals, it was the foundation of this entire story. She backed away slowly. "You were part of this?" Elise nodded. "I was part of the investigation, years ago. A hidden surveillance program. It got buried under non-disclosure agreements and black files. I walked away when I realized how far they were willing to go to test their reach. The man at the airport was involved in those experiments. Psychological ops, behavioral control, they were testing response patterns, fear triggers. You were selected because you had no direct link to him, or to me. That's what made it clean. But when Tyler started digging into his own government records and got flagged, the rules changed. So this was all a setup. From the beginning? No, Elise said. It was worse. It was a cover-up. For a long moment, nothing made sense. Then everything did. The missing reports. The disappearing officer. The perfect surveillance. It had never been about theft or scams or even personal vendettas. It was about control over data, perception, behavior. She had been dropped into a long-running experiment or operation that she was never meant to see. And now that she had, there was no easy way out. Elise handed her a flash drive. "This has names, dates, access logs. I stole it before they wiped my access. I don't know what's on it. Tyler was supposed to open it. But if they find out you have it, they won't stop. Not until they get it back or you disappear. She took the drive with numb fingers, barely able to comprehend what was happening. Her whole world had tilted. She had been the one searching for answers, but now she wasn't even sure what the question was anymore. Who was really running this? What was the real goal? And how many people had been dragged into this silent war without ever realizing it? Elise didn't stay. She left as quickly as she had appeared, leaving behind more questions than answers. And as the sun began to rise, casting pale light across the still-open burner phone and the flash drive in her palm, she realized something even more chilling. If this drive really held the truth, then someone was already on their way to silence it. And she spent the next few hours with the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand, as if letting go of it might somehow erase everything that had happened. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than files and data, like it carried choices she hadn't agreed to make. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars passed, people moved about their routines, and everything looked normal. But her world had shifted so far off its axis that normalcy felt like a lie. She stared at the flash drive and the burner phone next to it, trying to decide what to do next. Every instinct screamed for her to disappear, to walk away before whatever force behind this decided to tighten its grip. But something inside her refused. Not because she was brave, not because she was ready, but because Tyler was still missing, and now she knew his silence wasn't random. Just after noon, she drove to her mother's house, not because she thought she'd be safer there, but because she needed answers, real ones. If Tyler had been in contact with Elise, there was a chance he had reached out to someone else in the family. Maybe he left a breadcrumb she hadn't seen yet. Her mother greeted her with a tired smile, clearly sensing something was wrong but not pressing the issue. That changed when she asked, "Has Tyler been here in the last week?" Her mother hesitated, visibly caught off guard. "No, well, he called. Left a voicemail, but it cut off. I meant to tell you, I just didn't want to worry you." "Why?" She felt something inside her twist. "Can I hear it?" Her mother retrieved her phone, confusion etched across her face. When the voicemail played, it was fragmented by static but unmistakably Tyler's voice. "If anything happens, check the photo album. Bottom drawer. Tell her not to trust." The message ended abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. Her mother looked at her, pale now, eyes wide. "Tell who not to trust," she whispered. She ran to the old cabinet in the hallway where they kept family keepsakes, flipping through dusty photo albums and stacks of birthday cards from decades past. At the very bottom, tucked beneath an envelope labeled graduation, she found a worn leather-bound notebook. Inside were pages of scribbled names, dates, abbreviations, and what looked like tracking numbers. Some entries were highlighted. Others were circled. One page in the center had a line scrawled in red ink, "Elise is part of the program, watch her." Her breath caught. He knew. Tyler had figured it out before she had, and he had tried to leave her a trail. But now that meant Elise had lied. Maybe not completely, but enough. Maybe she had handed over the flash drive to earn trust. Maybe she was still playing both sides. It didn't matter. If Tyler warned her not to trust Elise, there was a reason. The betrayal hit hard, not just because of the risk, but because a part of her had felt comfort when Elise showed up. It reminded her of a time when she hadn't felt so alone. Now even that was gone. She didn't have time to dwell on it. Less than an hour later, a message popped up on the burner phone. It was a single address and a countdown timer, 3 hours 57 minutes and 11 seconds. It was already ticking. No message, no instructions, just a destination and time. She stared at it, heart pounding. The implication was clear: go to the address, or face the consequences. But what was waiting for her there? A meeting? A trap? A trade? She had no idea. But then, a second message followed, and this one made her knees buckle, a live video feed of Tyler. He was alive. Tied to a chair in what looked like an empty warehouse, disoriented but conscious. The camera zoomed in just enough for her to see his face, bruised and frightened. Then it cut out. Her body felt like lead. She stood there frozen, unable to think, unable to breathe. The phone buzzed again. This time, a message in plain text: "You have 4 hours. Bring the drive. Come alone. No law. No Elise." She stared at the screen, reading it over and over, as her mind began to fracture under the pressure of the decision she now faced. Bring the drive, risk losing whatever leverage she had, and walk into the lion's den with no backup. Or refuse, and risk Tyler's life. There was no version of this that ended without cost. She had to choose between her brother and the truth, between surrendering the one thing that might expose whoever was behind this and preserving the last real family she had left. She didn't know what to believe anymore. If Elise was part of the program, maybe everything Elise had said was just a push in the direction they wanted. Maybe the flash drive itself was planted, something to bait her into cooperating. But what if it wasn't? What if it really was the key to everything and she handed it over too easily? Every scenario spun out in her head like a maze with no exit. And underneath it all, the clock kept ticking. She had been dropped into a story that no longer had a clear villain, or even a clear goal. All she knew was that she had a deadline, a brother whose life was on the line, and no one left she could trust. She looked down at the flash drive, then at the burner phone, then back at the notebook Tyler had hidden like a final lifeline. The stakes were real. The danger was closing in. And now, she had less than 4 hours to decide who she was willing to lose, and what she was willing to give up, in order to end this. The scariest part wasn't the threat. It was knowing that no matter what she chose, there was no turning back. She drove to the address with her heart in her throat, the flash drive in her jacket pocket and the burner phone blinking steadily in the passenger seat. The streets blurred as she sped through them, her mind replaying Tyler's bruised face, the cold message, and the steadily ticking clock that gave her less than an hour now. Her hands trembled on the wheel as every rational part of her screamed to turn around, to call the police, the FBI, anyone, but trust had become a currency she no longer had. Every official report she'd filed had been scrubbed, every time she reached out for help had been intercepted. This wasn't just a few corrupt people in high places anymore. It was an infrastructure, a system built to protect itself, to erase trails, and to make anyone who got close disappear. The address led her to a long-abandoned commercial building on the edge of the city, tucked behind a row of rusted shipping containers and cracked pavement. The kind of place no one would look twice at. As she stepped out of the car, the air felt electric, heavy with the kind of tension that prickled under your skin and made your body feel colder than it should be. She approached slowly, scanning the perimeter, trying not to let her fear paralyze her. The main entrance had been left ajar. No guards. No surveillance cameras she could see. Too quiet. Inside, the building was gutted, skeletal, just steel beams, dusty concrete, and long-forgotten scaffolding. It was the perfect place to vanish someone. She moved cautiously toward the only lit room at the far end of the corridor. That's when she saw him, Tyler, slumped in a chair, weak but alive. Her breath caught. She ran to him, dropping to her knees, reaching for the ropes that bound his wrists. But before she could even touch him, a voice rang out from the shadows behind her. "You shouldn't have come alone." She turned, heart pounding, and froze. It was someone she hadn't expected in a million years, Detective Marcus Green, the investigator she'd spoken to early on, the one who had seemed sympathetic, even apologetic when no leads turned up. He stepped into the light, dressed in plain clothes now, no badge, no gun visible, but every inch of him radiated quiet authority. And something colder. "I told them you were smarter than this," he said calmly, as if this was just another part of the job. But desperation does funny things. She stared at him, her voice caught between fury and disbelief. "You're part of this?" He gave a slight shrug, like the question bored him. "I'm part of the cleanup crew. Always have been. You weren't supposed to make it this far. And your brother, well, he wasn't even on the list until he started snooping in the wrong database. This could have ended a dozen times. Elise warned you, didn't she?" She wasn't lying, just left out the part where she came crawling back to us the second things got complicated. The betrayal cracked something inside her. Elise had known. She hadn't just been used, she'd been part of the mechanism all along. Every confession, every tearful warning, it had all been designed to funnel her into this moment. But why? Why her? Why Tyler? Because, Marcus continued, answering a question she hadn't voiced aloud, you were part of phase 2. Behavioral profile flagged you years ago. Too curious. Too tenacious. And as the walls of trust and logic closed in, one thing became terrifyingly clear: the deeper she got, the less any of this could be chalked up to coincidence. Someone was orchestrating every move. Someone with access, power, and a motive she had yet to understand. And with every step she took forward, the risk to those she loved was growing. What she didn't know yet was that the next clue, one she would stumble across within the next 24 hours, would change everything again, and not in the way she expected. It was just after midnight when she finally forced herself to lie down, but sleep never came. Her apartment felt different now, like the walls were listening, like the silence had turned hostile. Every sound outside, every creak of the building, made her pulse race. She hadn't turned off the lights. She couldn't. Not after the voice memo, not after the doctored footage, and definitely not after Tyler stopped replying to her messages completely. Her calls went straight to voicemail. His phone rang twice, then cut off. At first, she convinced herself it was nothing, maybe his battery died, or he was in one of his moods, but deep down she knew better. Tyler wouldn't go dark like this, not after he had just emailed her saying he was concerned. That's not how he operated, and it wasn't a coincidence. Something had happened. The next morning, her worst fears began to solidify. She called his workplace. They said he hadn't shown up, hadn't called in, and wasn't responding to any messages. They sounded concerned but cautious, like they were trying not to jump to conclusions. But she had no such restraint anymore. She knew something was wrong. With shaky hands, she opened her laptop and scanned through her search history, trying to retrace her steps, to find something she might have missed. That's when she saw it, an email she didn't remember opening. No subject line, no sender name, just a timestamp, 3:17 a.m. She clicked. Inside, one sentence. You were warned. And attached, another image, this time, not of her. It was Tyler, standing outside a gas station near his apartment, looking at his phone. The timestamp was from the previous night, less than an hour before he stopped answering. Her stomach twisted into a knot so tight she couldn't breathe. Whoever was behind this had eyes everywhere. She left her apartment within the hour, unable to sit still a second longer. The streets felt unfamiliar, despite being ones she walked daily. Every car that slowed down made her flinch. Every person who glanced her way felt like a possible threat. Her paranoia was no longer just anxiety, it was instinct. She started to believe someone was tailing her. Not directly, not overtly, but at a distance. A dark SUV that had circled her block twice. A man with sunglasses who stayed too long at the corner coffee shop. Maybe they were nothing. Maybe they were everything. At the police station, she was met with skeptical eyes. When she explained the pattern of events, Tyler's disappearance, the emails, the wiped airport report, the officer she spoke to seemed more concerned with how she knew her brother was missing than with doing anything about it. He promised to look into it, but she could tell from his tone and his body language that she was being categorized as another conspiracy-minded civilian overwhelmed by stress. She didn't bother arguing. She simply left, more alone than before. That night, the threat became personal. A package arrived at her door, unmarked, no postage, no return address. Inside, a burner phone and a single sheet of paper with a typed message, "Keep looking and next time, it won't be your brother." Her vision blurred. Her hands trembled as she dropped the note on the floor like it was something poisonous. The phone powered on immediately, already unlocked, displaying one saved video. She hit play. It was a shaky clip shot through a window, zoomed in on her apartment building. In it, she appeared briefly, walking across the living room. The angle suggested it had been taken from a car parked across the street. She was being watched, closely, intimately, and by someone who wanted her to know it. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was control. They were steering her, managing what she saw, who she trusted, and when she moved. She sat down hard on the floor, overwhelmed by a wave of helplessness so intense it felt physical. She tried to think clearly, to piece together how it had gotten this far. How a dead phone at an airport had led to a missing brother, fake security officers, erased footage, voice memos with strangers speaking about her like she was a pawn. None of it made sense, not yet. But someone was investing time, energy, and dangerous resources to keep her from knowing the truth. And the further she dug, the more sophisticated the threats became. But what exactly was she getting close to? What could possibly be so valuable, so dangerous, that it required this level of manipulation? Theories bloomed in her mind, each darker than the last. A smuggling ring? Government surveillance? Corporate espionage? None of it felt too far-fetched anymore. Then, without warning, her own laptop open on the kitchen table shut down. The screen went black. She rushed over, pressing keys, trying to reboot it. Nothing. Then, a new message appeared. Not on the laptop, but projected from the burner phone. A new alert, a new push notification. Time's up. That's all it said. And in that moment, she understood something she hadn't fully accepted until now. This wasn't just a warning. This was a countdown. And something was coming. Fast. You were one of a dozen people seeded into this experiment. They wanted to test how far someone would go for the truth, how easily you could be manipulated with the right pressure points. You think this is just about you and your brother? This is happening in 6 other cities right now. Same setup. Same bait. Different subjects. The room spun. An experiment. Her life, her fear, her pain engineered outcomes in a test too large to comprehend. She looked at Tyler, who was awake now, his eyes wide with shock, his voice hoarse as he whispered, "It's not just them. It's federal. They're feeding this to corporations, tracking how we react, what we believe, who we trust. They're building models." His words spilled out, frantic and fragmented. "I saw the files, the people on the list. They're watching all of us." Marcus stepped forward, expression flat. "That's enough." She rose slowly, shaking with adrenaline and rage. "So what happens now? You kill us? Erase the evidence?" She felt the flash drive in her pocket like it was burning through her skin. Marcus didn't smile, but his voice softened with condescension. "No. We offer you a choice. You walk out of here and forget all of this, start over somewhere new. Or you hand over the drive, and we make sure your brother disappears for good. You don't get both." The ultimatum hit like a thunderclap. Walk away and lose everything, or fight and lose someone she couldn't bear to let go. She stood there, trapped in a nightmare engineered by people who had turned her life into a science project. Every emotion she had felt, the fear, the confusion, the sense of being hunted, had been manufactured. But what they hadn't accounted for was this: she still had a choice. Not an easy one. Not one that came without consequences. But hers. She reached into her jacket slowly, heart hammering, and pulled out the flash drive. Her hand hovered there, seconds away from surrender, from safety, from Tyler's freedom or the illusion of it. And in that moment, a second voice rang out from the shadows. One she hadn't heard before. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Another figure stepped forward, and this time, her jaw dropped in disbelief. It was her father. The man who had vanished from their lives when she was 12, presumed dead in a highway accident. But now he stood there, alive, older, dressed in black tactical gear and staring down Marcus with a look of utter contempt. And just like that, everything she thought she knew about her past, her family, and the conspiracy unraveled into something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. For a long, heart-shattering moment, the air in that gutted warehouse felt like it stopped moving entirely. Her father's voice echoed in her ears, pulling at memories buried so deep she hadn't let herself touch them in over a decade. The accident. The funeral with no body. The silence from the authorities. The way her mother could never look her in the eye when she asked what really happened. It hadn't made sense back then, and now she knew why. Her father hadn't died, he had disappeared on purpose. And judging by the way Marcus flinched at the sight of him, her father wasn't just alive. He had once been one of them. The tension cracked like thunder. Marcus raised a hand slowly, not in surrender but warning. "You should have stayed gone, Daniel. You knew what would happen if you ever came back." Her father stepped between them, never taking his eyes off Marcus. And you knew what would happen if you came after my family. You made a mistake. You underestimated her." He turned to her then, and the look in his eyes, part guilt, part pride, told her everything. He had left to protect them. But in doing so, he'd abandoned them to the very machine he'd tried to escape. Marcus gestured subtly toward the hallway, and she heard the soft shuffle of footsteps. Reinforcements. Maybe 3, maybe more. Her father moved faster than she thought possible. In one smooth motion, he pulled a sidearm from beneath his jacket and tossed her a second weapon, a sleek black pistol she caught more out of reflex than readiness. "I didn't want this for you," he said, low and steady. "But you need to know everything." Gunfire cracked through the air before she could process another word. Her father ducked, pulling her to cover behind an overturned steel table, while bullets ripped through the space where they had just stood. It wasn't a firefight, it was chaos. Controlled and methodical from the other side, panicked and desperate on theirs. She crawled to Tyler and cut him loose while her father covered them. "We have to get out," she shouted. But he shook his head. "No. You have to upload the drive. The truth is on there. You get it out, everything collapses." She stared at him, shaking. "What truth?" His jaw clenched, the words hard to form. "They're not testing fear. They're training operatives. Civilian profiles. They target people with the right neurological markers, high empathy, high adaptability. They manipulate their lives, their pain, and use them to predict descent patterns, collapse movements before they even begin. You weren't a threat, they were making you one." Her stomach dropped. The entire conspiracy wasn't about surveillance, it was about control at a level deeper than any government agency had ever publicly admitted. They weren't just tracking behavior. They were shaping it. Creating puppets out of people who thought they were free. The voice memos, the camera footage, the planted meetings, none of it had been random. She had been steered into uncovering the truth not because they failed to stop her, but because they wanted to see how she'd respond. A living simulation, a test subject. And Tyler had gotten too close to their source code. Tyler's voice cut through the madness. "I uploaded a backup 2 days ago. If they kill us, it's still out there. But if you get this flash drive to someone trustworthy, it'll validate everything." She knew what that meant. If they were found with it, they wouldn't make it out. But if one of them got away, the game would be over. Her father motioned toward the east exit. "There's a car. You go. Now." She looked at him, her heart breaking. "What about you?" He didn't answer. He just raised his gun and turned back toward Marcus and the shadows moving closer. The last thing she saw as she and Tyler ran through the exit was her father disappearing into the crossfire like a ghost returning to the war he had never really left. The car was unmarked, keys already in the ignition. As they sped away, sirens began to swell in the distance, not police, not rescue, but another layer of the machine coming to clean the scene. She drove with one hand, gripping the flash drive with the other. Every second that passed felt like a countdown. Tyler hacked into the satellite tether using a secure hotspot and launched the contents of the drive to multiple media servers, including one encrypted portal that neither of them fully understood but had been used by whistleblowers in the past. When the upload hit 100%, Tyler exhaled hard. "It's done." And for a moment, it felt like they had won. Like maybe the truth would be stronger than the lies. Like maybe someone would listen. But that night, as they holed up in a cheap motel miles from the city, a news alert came through. The leak had made it to a few underground sites, conspiracy channels already calling it the biggest data dump since Snowden. But there was no national coverage. No press conference. No confirmation. Instead, an official statement was released by a faceless government spokesperson denying all claims and categorizing the leak as AI-generated misinformation. The twist cut deeper than anything else. They hadn't just buried the truth. They had used the very tools of doubt to weaponize disbelief. In a world full of deepfakes, manipulated news cycles, and digital overload, the public didn't know what to trust anymore, and the ones pulling the strings were counting on that. The truth had been revealed. But would anyone believe it? She sat back, drained and broken. The game wasn't over. It had just changed shape. And now she understood the conspiracy wasn't just about hiding what was real. It was about making sure people stopped looking for it at all. The months that followed felt like an eternity, a blur of half-truths and broken systems. The files on the flash drive had made their way into the right hands eventually, but the fallout wasn't the world-changing event they had hoped for. What they had uncovered, what her father had sacrificed his life to reveal, was too dangerous for the public to grasp in one swift breath. The conspiracy had spread too deep into the fabric of society to be taken down in one blow. It wasn't just government operatives or corporate moguls pulling the strings, it was a machine built on years of misinformation, fear, and carefully placed seeds of doubt. The data, the proof of manipulation, was out there, but it felt like a drop in an ocean of chaos. It was hard to imagine any real change coming from it, not without exposing more, not without risking everything again. She and Tyler had managed to disappear. They had left the life they once knew, and with the help of a few trusted allies, people who still believed in the value of truth, they were able to rebuild something that felt like safety. But safety wasn't the same as peace. Every sound at night, every unfamiliar knock at the door, every new face in a crowd made her second-guess herself, made her wonder if they were being watched, if their every move was being recorded for another twisted experiment. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. And then there was her father. His sacrifice hadn't been in vain, but the price he had paid, the choices he had made to protect her, felt like a wound that would never fully heal. The weight of his absence loomed large in her life, and the questions he had left behind still haunted her. Had he been right to walk away from them? To leave without a trace, to disappear into the shadows for the greater good? She didn't know. Part of her wanted to hate him for abandoning them. Part of her wanted to understand him, to find the man who had once been her father and bring him back, to tell him that she didn't need him to protect her anymore, that she could stand on her own. But that was a pipe dream. She didn't need him. She needed answers. And as much as the search for those answers weighed on her, she knew it was an impossible task. The system had buried them too well, too thoroughly. The people who had created this game of manipulation had made sure the threads were impossible to follow. In the quiet moments, when she allowed herself to think, she realized something deeper. There was no escaping the world they had created. No matter how far she ran, how many layers of lies she peeled back, the machine would continue turning. It would morph, adapt, evolve, and find new ways to track and control, like a virus mutating to survive. It was in the air they breathed, in the data they unknowingly handed over every time they swiped a credit card, clicked on a link, shared a post. It was a quiet war, a war not fought with bullets but with information, with control over every aspect of human behavior. And the most terrifying part was that no one seemed to care enough to fight back. People were too distracted, too numb, too consumed by their own daily struggles to look beyond the surface, to realize that they were being shaped by forces they couldn't even see. Tyler had started a new life, far away from everything that had come before, but she could see the remnants of their shared history in his eyes. They were both carrying the same burden, the same weight. They weren't free, not really. Maybe they never would be. But at least they were together. And in the end, that was something. She had learned to let go of the need for closure, for the perfect ending. The truth didn't come with a ribbon or a bow, it came in fragments, scattered across the landscape like pieces of a puzzle no one had the time to finish. But they would keep fighting. They would keep pushing, because it wasn't just about what they'd lost, it was about what they could still save. There was always something worth fighting for, even if it was just the hope that the next person might not fall into the same trap. As she sat there, staring out the window at the city skyline, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not for them, not for anyone. The conspiracy hadn't been dismantled, it had simply shifted, found new faces to wear, new places to hide. And somewhere, in some dark corner of the world, there were people like her, like Tyler, who had uncovered a sliver of the truth but had been silenced before they could shout it loud enough for the world to hear. The game was bigger than she had ever imagined. And yet, she couldn't help but wonder if that was just the beginning. If the real battle, one that she would never see, was still yet to come. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that there might be peace, even if it was fleeting. But as the hours slipped by, the distant hum of a helicopter broke the silence. Her hand instinctively brushed against the burner phone in her pocket, the one they hadn't touched in weeks. And for the first time in a long time, she couldn't shake the thought that maybe someone, somewhere, was still watching. The truth had been exposed, but the fight for freedom, it was just beginning.